right, can you hear me up the back? Great. Could I have a volunteer to take a question? Anyone? It's about this graph up. It's about this slide I've got up. Yeah. Ah, thank you. All right. So tell me, which picture do you like best?
Do I like that?
Yeah.
I like the guy up the top left, but is it which one's worse most? Or?
No, it's just which one you like best.
I like that one.
All right. Why?
He just seems friendly. I like the colours.
You can.
He's got a nice smile.
All right. You can relate to that.
Yeah.
Friendly, nice smile, bit like you. So which one's worth the most? Which one would you pay for?
Well, I've seen that one a lot. I know it's really popular, but I'm guessing that it's not that one.
So the one, the bottom right, is the one you think? Okay.
I'm guessing that it's not because I feel like this is a trick question. You seem like
A tricky kind of guy.
tricky kind of guy.
All right. It's 3 o'clock. I'll start the lecture now. My name's Raymond de Silva Rosa. I'm going to be your lecturer for investment analysis. And just to give you the way this will go, I'll talk until 2:45. I've got one rule in this lecture. There's only one person talking at any one point, and that's me. If you want to talk, I'll stop until you finish, and then either you leave or I will leave. But otherwise, it's just me that's talking. So, I'll talk until 3:45. You'll have a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 5 minutes to 4. I'll talk until 4:35. We'll have the quiz then. So this is about investment analysis. And you've probably seen this before. If you ate today, thank a farmer. So you know why? Because farmers are productive people. You could have another similar thing like this. Thank you for being a nurse. Again, that's fairly obviously understood by anyone. If you go to any health professional, you know what they do. They provide a service. They help you get better. That's why we ought to be grateful for farmers and for nurses. They're productive people. How many times have you heard, thank you for being a banker? None. And it's kind of surprising. Why haven't we heard, thank you for being a banker? The kind of sentiment that most people have when they talk about this is, when they talk about a banker, is not to thank them, but something like this: arrest the bankers. And probably you can understand a sense of this. If someone said arrest the nurses, arrest the farmers, you'd be up in protest. But arrest the bankers, you sort of think, yeah, look, although in third year finance, and I'm going to get into this industry, I can understand that. So, don't you find that peculiar? It's sort of a question that's important for you, if you're in third year, that the industry in which you're taking a major is one that is viewed with considerable, to put it mildly, disdain. This isn't just a view of Marxists or left-wingers or the Guardian newspaper. It's quite widespread. So John Cassidy says, much of what investment bankers do is socially worthless. And this is the remarkable thing, the most profitable industry in America and in Australia as well, I can tell you, has been one that doesn't design, build or sell a single tangible thing. Now I might think this is a sign of the times that we live in. How come we've come to this pass where the most profitable industry is one that doesn't design, build or sell a single tangible thing? And as I said, this is something that a lot of people, it's not just uninformed layperson, it's quite people in quite good positions. So one of the top economists in the world is Sendhil Mullainathan at Harvard University. And he says nearly 1 in 5 students who took a job in 2014, and these figures haven't changed much since then, went into finance. For economic majors, the number was closer to 1 in 2. And he says, I can't help wondering, is this the best use of talent? Similarly, you have Christine Romer, again, the chair of the US Council of Economic Advisor, no raging left-winger. She's not like those people selling you those newspapers out there. She's pretty much part of the establishment. Says, some of our brightest minds make small fortunes arranging the deals rather than pursuing potentially more socially valuable careers in fields such as science, medicine, and education. So if you're a doctor and a specialist, you might make a lot of money, because one of the reasons being that the field is limited. So if you're an ophthalmologist, say, you can't just come and get practice here. You have to get the acceptance of everyone, and there's very few, which means you can charge a lot more. But people still think, oh, you're doing good. Isn't that a good field to get into? You're doing good and also doing remarkably well, like to the tune of $1 million a year. Perfect. People don't say that for finance. But we have this: Australia's financial service sector is the largest contributor to the national economy, contributing around $140 billion to GDP over the last year. It's now a major driver of economic growth. So you have this thing, this socially worthless activity, yet it's a major driver to economic growth. And it has over 450,000 people employed in it. Popularity of finance. Here, there's over 600. It's by far the largest third-year unit. Why do people do this? Why are people going into finance? There's the answer. One answer, I reckon, is the one that Willie Sutton, he robbed the bank. He got caught. And then he was there being counseled by the priest while he was awaiting trial. And the priest asked him, Willie, why did you rob the bank? And Willie Sutton says, it's where the money is. Why are people going to finance? It's where the money is. The financial sector offers more compensation than any other industries, even after controlling for individual characteristics. So the lifetime pay enjoyed by an MBA graduate, after controlling for how skilled they are, after controlling for their qualifications, the premium is between $1.5 to $5 million in present value terms. So these people are earning, if you like, economic rent, way in excess of what you would normally expect, given their talents. The question is why? And here it's true. Now, this is an interesting graph. This shows the premium earned by financial sector wages from around the turn of the last century, so from 1910 through to 2005, around close to 100 years. And we see that for lots of the time, finance has earned a premium, sometimes a very substantial one. Since 1990 through to there, it's been 40%. But even in the period from 1915 through to 1930, there's been a large premium. But there have also been periods when it's decreased. And that's something that ought to concern you, because are we entering that period now when you have 600 people in each class for some years going to finance? Supply is meeting the demand, and you might expect wages to fall. Do we expect that to happen? To give you a sense of the kind of returns to finance, so most of you would have heard of Apple CEO Tim Cook. He earned a bonus of $12 million in 2018, his biggest ever. Now, you might think that's a lot of money for one person, but in some ways, Tim Cook has presided over a company that is the largest by market value in human history. Briefly touched over $1 trillion. There hasn't been a company that has hit $1 trillion in market capitalization. That's his bonus, but over the 10-year period, he's got shares worth $121 million from his 10-year stock award, bringing his total hold to $136 million. Again, you might think that's too much money for one person. But on the other hand, this is an exceptional company. It takes an exceptional person to run that company. So maybe $136 million is okay. Now compare that for someone running a tangible business. This is Ken Griffin. I should have asked someone who recognized him or whatever. But anyway, it's Ken Griffin, now you know. Ken Griffin is 50 years old. And Ken likes a good painting and is prepared to pay for it. He paid for this painting, think of a number. 150 million I got a bid for. Anyone lower, higher? $300 million. 300. Now have a look at this painting again. Now you don't have another look. What is this painting, right? Oh, yeah. Whoa. Let me have another look at this. That's something I want to talk about. What makes something valuable? It's not the cash flows. You've learned everything about cash flows. This painting isn't going to generate any cash flows. It's going to cost him. There's going to be cash outflows with keeping this. But you've got insurance. You've got to keep it somewhere. So that's something you need a framework to understand. Why do people pay so much for this? He could afford it. He made $870 million in 2008. That even wasn't his biggest year. His biggest year was in 2015 when he bought that painting, when he made $1.7 billion. And just to give you a sense of how much this is, if the average Australian earnings of 82,000, it would take you 10,500 years to get the same amount as to save up that much. So, another question you might like, forget about the painting, have a look at what's inside there, what's between those ears. What does he know that you don't know? What does he know that Einstein mightn't have known? That's right. What does he know that his professors at Harvard, or professors at UWA for that matter, don't know? Okay, we'll look at that. The painting that you liked. This is the Jaideep thing. He was a student last year, and he painted this, Joel Creasy, who's the patron of the Ronald McDonald Foundation. And that went for $10,000. Okay. Not too shabby, pretty good actually. Anyway, the question here we've got to ask is, why on earth should finance be the biggest and most highly paid industry when it's just a utility like sewage or gas? You know, we need finance. Everyone can understand this. And this is Paul Woolley who's saying this, who was a financier himself until he thought, this is just bad business. I want to bring it down. So he founded this Centre for the Study of Capital Market Dysfunctionality. So it's like a cancer that's growing to infinite size. And you know what? People have been saying the same thing for years, and finally, after much convincing, the federal government of the day decided, we'll appoint a Royal Commission. And the Royal Commission into misconduct in the banking, superannuation and financial services industry did indeed turn up some very bad behaviour, some egregiously bad behaviour. And the stars of this is Justice Kenneth Hayne, who was the Commissioner, and Rowena Orr, Queen's Counsel. So the Queen's Counsel is a appellation to if you're a top lawyer, and she was a treat to see last year. So if you haven't seen her before, look it up on Google. Look at her cross-examining the CEOs of the companies, the leading lights, and making them squirm. I think it was great entertainment. But the conduct identified and described in the Commission's interim report includes conduct by many entities that have taken place over many years, causing substantial loss to many customers but yielding substantial profits to the entities concerned. Very often the conduct has broken the law, and if it's not broken the law, the conduct has fallen short of the kind of behaviour the community not only expects. So one answer to this, Ken Griffin, is maybe he cheats. Maybe he steals money from people. Maybe he's just dishonest. Isn't this like a Willie Sutton, but in a different form? Do you really believe that? So he's a money manager. He tells people, give me the money, I'll manage it for you, and I'll get you a higher return. That's how he makes his money. Is there some... Now, no one holds a gun to his head and says, invest with Ken Griffin. So, the point being, this could be true, but we also have to find out why is it that this sector makes so much money. Possibly they cheat, but really, can they be cheating on such large scale? Can that really be the answer? It seems to be endemic, though. So we have banksters, we have Britain's price-fixing scandal and its global impact. So this isn't just an Australian problem, it's worldwide. And it's also true, regrettably, within the industry. So a famous article in Nature, or a notorious article saying business culture and dishonesty in the banking industry, they show that employees of a large international bank behave on average honestly. So when they're thinking of themselves as individuals, they're behaving as normal individuals, they're behaving honestly. But you put them in a situation where you prime them, so if you're a student of psychology, you'd know about priming and cueing. They think of themselves, now think of yourself as a bank employee, they begin to behave unethically and dishonestly. So maybe it's something in the industry, which should be of concern to us. So I'll be bringing up a way for you to think about this moral issue with banking later on in this lecture. But here there's a long list of misdemeanors by the banks, and basically saying why banking culture in many ways facilitates this kind of dishonesty. It isn't just a modern-day phenomenon. Way back, 4 centuries ago, William Shakespeare wrote of this, The Merchant of Venice, about a financier using the terms of his contract to enforce a deal that was seen to be particularly unfair. And one reason I just thought this was a good plug, because there's a play on this 7th of March 2019, so go along and see it. It's a classic, great play. I want to talk about a specific firm, the average annual Goldman Sachs. Average annual earnings in Australia is $82,000 a year. Goldman Sachs, 36,600 employees worldwide, on average earn $408,000. Not everyone earns, some earn less, others earn more, but no, that's the average. And so the criticism here is they're skimming this money. They're not creating anything, but somehow they're being able to extract value from every transactions that they preside over. Again, I want to point out here that no one holds a gun to your head and says to Goldman Sachs, come and do business with us. People go to Goldman Sachs and say, I want to do business with them. And they charge their fees. So the view of Goldman Sachs is this. This is a famous quote. If you haven't heard it, you'll come across this again. It says, Goldman Sachs is a great vampire squid wrapped around the face of humanity, relentlessly jamming its blood funnel into anything that smells like money. What kind of person goes and works in Goldman Sachs? Turns out, a person pretty much like you. These are the graduates of ours who got into Goldman Sachs. They recruit disproportionately from UWA. Not all of them went to Goldman Sachs, others went into different firms, but these are all fairly recent students at UWA. So if you're thinking, ooh, I want to get into that, you looked at this 400,000, you're in the right place to go into this. I might add something, they're all good people. So I'd happily hire them for whatever salary because they're all talented individuals. So Goldman Sachs gets a lot of criticism. And the kind of thing that they say, and so around the time of the financial crisis, the CEO, who's just going to step down soon, he's been there for a long time, is Lloyd Blankfein. And he said, he was asked about the role of Goldman Sachs, and he said, he's got quite a good sense of humor, but he said, I'm just a banker doing God's work. He made a flippant comment. He had no idea that this would be picked up by the press. He ought to have had an idea, but sometimes you just say something. And he was pilloried for this. Goldman Sachs, you guys, you've ripped off the system, and it's not enough that you're making money. Now you're saying that you're doing God's work? You're adding value to us? The kind of person who's doing God's work isn't Goldman Sachs. The kind of person who's doing God's work is this person here, Mother Teresa. I don't know if you've heard of Mother Teresa. She's an Albanian nun who spent a lot of her time in Calcutta helping the poor, the destitute, and now she's going to be a saint. Now, literally doing God's work. The question I want to put to you is this. Could both Lloyd Blankfein and Mother Teresa be doing God's work? Seems improbable. You're pretty happy to agree that Mother Teresa will be, but really, Lloyd? It's important that if you do get a sense of that, what I'm saying is that it's important that you get a sense of how finance adds value. What is the work of finance? Because if you don't know that, how will you navigate the moral thickets that you will come across? So you need to know the ways in which finance add values and how in which ways finance can be unhelpful. And that's part of this course today. And it's a very practical lesson. Because if you don't know, if you want to be one of those people making lots of money and doing good, you've got to know the ways in which finance contributes to the economy. So the three questions is, how does finance create value? What is finance work? So it's a bit like, with the farmer. What does a farmer do? Grows food. But how does the farmer do that? How does the farmer go about growing food? That's the nature of the second question. What is finance work? And the third question is, why is finance so profitable and will it remain so? So by the end of today, this is what you ought to have a good idea, and particularly after you revise, you need to understand. Should you care about the answers? So this is where other people say, no, don't go to university, they don't teach you anything. They're irrelevant to big employers. Just think outside the box. What's the box? Where's the box? Where should I think outside it? But, be creative. Take a risk. They all, don't worry about this theory stuff. Go to a university where they'll teach you some real practical stuff. Yeah. And you forget about all that you learn anyway by the time you finish your exam in 3 weeks. Yeah, you probably relate to that. So I look at this, and then you see here, 8th of January, recently, they say, Australia's investment banks will break the mould. More confirmation. People are here not looking to finance, but they're looking outside. They're looking beyond the traditional pools of finance and commerce to select military personnel, entrepreneurs, scientists, mathematicians, engineers, because they think outside the box. They're not constrained by all these cash flows, this kind of discounted, that's not where it's at. You've got to think creatively. And they recruit from a myriad of backgrounds. So I look at this and I think, maybe I should read on and see what's happening. And then I look at this picture. And I relax. I think, no, of course. Think outside the box, my foot. Kevin Bart was sitting here in this class 2 or 3 years back. He's a top student in finance. He knows his cash flows. He knows the finance. He knows the economics. He knows his accounting. He's also an engineer. So when Citigroup picks him up over here and says, we're picking the engineers, they're also making sure that he knows the basics as well. So he got a double degree in engineering and in commerce. So what does finance work? Let's have a look at this. How does finance create value? So well-functioning markets then, what they do is they facilitate, this is how they add value. They facilitate the storage and exchange of value. They facilitate the intertemporal matching of consumption and productivity. If you've used Afterpay, how many people have used Afterpay? Yeah, in the morning class, no one used it either. I don't know how they're worth so much money, but no one uses it in your age group. This is quite a remarkably thrifty group. You save up and then you buy. None of this buy and spend now, pay later. Afterpay is that kind of a thing, right? Matching, you get your money later, but you want to spread your consumption over a period of time. That's what Afterpay helps you do. Efficient risk sharing and the separation of ownership and management. So these are the ways, and I'll look at that. It doesn't sound very impressive, but I'll go through examples that will illustrate what I mean, and hopefully you'll get a sense of how important this is. And then the finance work involves intermediation, matching savers with spenders, and this is the work. This is what people get paid to do. This is where they get more money than in other industries because these things are valued, and if you can do this better than other people, then you get paid. That's where the rewards are. So the first thing that finance does is there's a storage and exchange of value. Barter works really well, but you have to have what's famously known as a coincidence of want. The person you want to buy from, exchange on, has to want what you have, and typically that's not the case. So this is where money is really handy. I recommend this for when people talk about a market economy. This one shows the organization of a prisoner of war camp. So it describes from a case study of a prisoner of war camp. So the prisoners there were, this was in Europe, they had the Germans, the Brits, the French, and the Italians, all in different sections in this prisoner of war camp. But then, as a result of trading between themselves, each of them was better off. So the economic productivity of this company, just by trading, not by manufacturing anything else, but everyone's utility was increased. So this gives you a great intuition, a great example that shows you how this operates. I recommend you read that. You can see that in the Middle Ages, with financial assets either unavailable or unattractive, people had little place to store them. So every now and again you come across a story in the newspaper, there's a hoard of bullion found in the ground, coins, and that's where people would have had to flee in a hurry. They couldn't take their money with them, or they forgot where they buried it. But this is what was happening over here. So real estate was, people invested in real estate because it's a store of value. In fact, they still do that. So Ken Griffin has bought $700 million worth of real estate, again, as a store of value. So it's not such an outdated concept. If you go in some third world countries, you'll see this. You'll see a lot of unfinished houses, unfinished buildings, and that's a form of saving. They'd like to put it in the bank. You might think, why do they have so many unfinished savings? One is they don't have enough money to build a complete house. But the other thing is, well, why don't they put the money in the bank until they complete it? But if there's no banking system, it pays then to build something solid and substantial that can't be stolen, and that way, and besides, you can also live in it until it's completed. So you get a bit of value in use as well. There's nothing as storage and exchange of value. So we have examples: gold coins, paper money, and digital money. And it's interesting, which one do you think is more real? A gold coin, a paper money, or a digital money? So back in the 13th century, the Chinese, in this respect, as in so many others, were the first here. They invented paper money. It's quite a radical concept. The thing I want to get over here is, when paper money, it's a matter of, this will go back to valuation when I talk about valuation. What's the difference between a gold coin and a paper? Somehow this seems more real, more related to some intrinsic value. Paper money seems kind of less real, and digital money, God, it doesn't even exist in physical form. But really, what is required isn't that it's real, it's that everyone believes in this. And this is an important concept which relates to finance, and I'll come back to it. It's underplayed. You wouldn't come across this in normal finance courses. But this notion of a belief, if you believe it and everyone else believes it, then it's real. So, if you express some religious belief, you'll often have people saying, oh, why do you believe in that? Do you believe in fairies in the bottom of the garden as well? You won't understand, you might say, or something if you're religious yourself. But then if someone says, I'm a rich person, and says, why? I've got $100 million in the bank. It's you're believing in something. The money's not even there. It's just that you believe it's there, they believe, everyone believes it's there, and therefore it becomes real. Because there's a psychology, there's a sociological concept here. That's more important, and we'll talk about that in later lectures. What's the implications of that for valuation? And here we have this other thing, just to show you the importance of money. What happens when you don't have places to invest in? Then you need to keep your money somewhere, and you pay someone to keep it. So here we have this an odd phenomenon, or something, an unusual phenomenon, where in the developed world there aren't enough investment opportunities. So we have a 7.9 trillion pile of negative yielding debt. In other words, it's normally when you have $10,000, if you get $10,000, one day you'll get to that point, you take to the bank and say, I'd like to give you money. And then the bank will say, oh, great, yeah, we'll look after it. Now, we'll send you an invoice for $200. You say, what? And the bank will say, well, we're looking after your money. You say, yeah, but I'm giving you money. And they'll say, yeah, so? We're charging you $200. You say, no, it doesn't work like that. I give you money, you pay me. They say, no. Take it somewhere else. And then you say, oh, well, I don't have any other place to take it. So yeah, this is kind of, you're stealing from me. Listen, you don't have to put it with us. That's what's happening here. You have a lot of people with money. They have somewhere safe to keep it. They don't have investment opportunities. So they're paying the banks to look after their money for them and to have it available when they want. So there's people talk about this negative debt as some kind of odd violation of the laws of economics. It's nothing of the kind. It's perfectly sensible. What's a bit unusual, though, here you have a Dutch household where, because of the way the contracts are written, the contract of this Dutch bank, they had a variable interest rate, and they said, well, you pay us whatever the variable interest rate is. When the variable interest rate went negative, the household said, oh, good, I'm looking after your money, now you pay me. So they borrowed the money to pay for their house, and now the bank is paying the money for looking after it, for them looking after it, as it were. You often get this again, still the lowest rate in 5,000 years. There's nothing of the sort. Negative interest rates have existed for a long time. And I'll give you an example here. They're common. It's just not so common in the developed world because the demand for money has usually exceeded the supply of money. So you've had to pay people interest when you want to borrow money. But otherwise, there's lots of circumstances where if you want people to look after your wealth, you have to pay them rather than the other way around. So an important lesson that you have is Economics 101, and my course is really all about demand and supply, applied in the financial world. So interest is the cost of money. When the demand for money is higher than the supply of money, then the borrowers have to pay for savers. This is the normal world that you're used to. We've now been in this new kind of world where the supply of money is higher than the demand for money, so the savers have to pay to store their money safely. So I want to show you an example here where this service of the bank system creating value for money. So we take this thing for granted. So I want to take it to an environment where there is no bank. But you have one person providing a financial service. And this is in the slums of India, where you have people, so you have this person, Jyoti, helping poor people in India save 1,000 rupees over 220 days. She charges. So what she does, she comes around every month or so, or every 10 days, and collects the money from the women. And at the end of the 220 days, she takes the money, she gives them back their money, but less $100 rupees. Whoa. What's she done with it? Nothing. She's simply taken it from them, kept it, and returned it to them. You might think this is extortionate. Why don't they just go to a bank and put their money in there? You have banks in India. Yeah, you do, but they're not in the slums. And these people, for them to get to the bank, might take them a whole day, which they can't afford to lose. So the researcher asked one of their clients, did you understand that she was paying around 30% per year on an annual basis for the privilege of saving it? Because they thought maybe these people are, they're slum dwellers after all. They mightn't be that smart. They don't have an education. But they knew what they were doing. They said, yeah, it's still a bargain. Without Jyoti, where would she keep the money? To send the children to school, she needs to save the money. She can't put it in the bank. She can't put it under the mattress. If you put it under the mattress, it'll get stolen, most likely by a relative, most likely by her husband, who might take her to drink. So this way, at least she has access to a way of saving. And that's real value that's been created. You had this situation here where there was this odd situation in India, well, unusual, not odd, where the government decided to flush out the money from the underground economy. And so they said, all those 500 rupee and 1,000 rupee notes, which is the denomination of choice for the black market over there, they said, it's no longer legal tender. This is a dramatic illustration of the point that money is simply a conventional thing, wealth. They said, from now on, in 6 months, we won't accept this. So what they want to do is to get people to come out, bring out their money and exchange it for new coins, and they could get a sense of the size of the black market, the underground economy. So the wives thought, oh God, we've all this saved. They saved it, they gave it to their husbands, and then there was a surge in domestic. The husbands went away and they said, oh no, the money fell out of my pocket, it got things. Most of the time, they spent it. So that's the storage and exchange of value. That's the way in which finance creates value. Another one is intertemporal matching of consumption and productivity. This is money as a bridge. You have your present time, and here you have your future, but you want to spend, and so money acts as a bridge between your current needs and your future wealth. So when you leave home, when you graduate from here, you'll have a standard of living that's equivalent to your parents. You'll live in a nice house, you'll have a car, you'll have a computer, you'll have a range of things. Your lifestyle won't be too different from your parents, but you'll be a lot poorer than your parents. Your wealth will be much less, but you can afford that, or you can do that. You can afford it because you're bringing forward your future wealth. You'll be borrowing the money to finance your current lifestyle. Similar with Afterpay, which none of you have used. So we'll move on. You've got some negative consequences, though. Now, this is the peculiar thing about finance. When you have this bridge, you think, oh, it's all good, 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 except that there are some negative consequences. One is, if the problem, as with Afterpay, the concern that people have is maybe people are borrowing too much, over-investing, and consuming in excess of sustainable levels. And this was the financial crisis. Part of the reason for the financial crisis, people borrowed too much, and they couldn't repay it. But there's another less obvious example, and here that money is a sinew of war. There's a book called The Dark Continent. Mic drop. The Dark Continent refers to Europe. And because a lot of the bloodiest wars occurred in Europe. But why? It's not that they were any more or less aggressive than people elsewhere, but this facilitated. So in Europe, around a few hundred years back, you had all of these hundreds of principalities. And like a lot of the princes, the kings and princes, wanted to increase their thing. You have a little principality here, Monaco, say, or something. You want to go a bit bigger. So you're looking covetously at your next principality down the road. And so they had little wars. But then you had a problem, because you could only go to war after the harvest. So you had a short window of time in the late summer when you could actually go to war, which kind of restricted things a bit. And also people weren't training. So when you wanted to train the troops, they were there harvesting. And so by the time they came back, they were tired or something, and then you had to rally the troops, literally, to get them to go and fight their neighbors. But if you could borrow money, opens up a whole new area of conflict. You can now start training your troops. You can have a standing army because now you're borrowing money and you can feed them, and you can go for war longer. And so this ends up an escalating arms race. So that's arguably, not arguably, just a bad thing about finance. But efficient risk sharing. This is another thing where finance adds value. So you're a farmer in Chicago, and you have a choice of a subsistence crop. Now, what is a subsistence crop? A subsistence crop is a crop that's enough to feed you and your family, and it's fairly safe. You can be sure that if you plant this crop, it'll be enough to keep your family for the next year. But it doesn't generate a lot of income, a lot of wealth. So you're permanently in a Malthusian state of, just eating enough to keep body and soul together. What you'd really like to do is to plant a higher valued crop like corn that you can sell and generate some economic surplus. But that's risky. You're good at farming, you're a good farmer, but you don't want to take that risk, because if you produce the corn and there's a glut, and you have to invest in corn, you have to buy, you might be bankrupt, and you might even lose your farm and everything. So you're in a worse situation. The risk is too much. So what you can have is then a farmer, you can have a grain future, you can have people to take on that risk for you. They'll promise to buy the corn at a fixed price, and they'll be hoping that the price will be higher, so they'll make the money that way. And they guarantee you a corn price, and then you can relax. You're not taking on that risk, and you can go on and doing what you do best, which is farming. So there's a nice division of labor. You invest more of what your talent is, and you farm away the risk. or you give away the risk. So that's finance working as it should. Less obviously, although it's still food, chicken McNuggets. So one of the glories of modern cuisine is the chicken McNugget. And let me explain something about chicken McNuggets, the business model of chicken McNuggets. Okay, so if you've never been in here, you mightn't know if you haven't been into McDonald's. The McDonald's business model is, we'll serve you delicious, greasy food at a fairly low price, or at least a price that is fairly standard. So after a lecture, you might think, I want to go to McDonald's, but how much do I have to save? Maybe $6, I don't know, I haven't bought. How much is a chicken McNuggets? Okay, it doesn't matter. Let's say it's $5, right? And you think, oh, $5, that's great. But if you go there and you think it's $11, $12, you don't know, then you're less likely. It's too risky. So you'll stay home. So the McDonald's business model relies on a consistent product at a consistent price. So they came up with this in 1983, and they ran into a problem. And this was solved by Ray Dalio back then. He's founder of the Bridgewater Associates, the most successful hedge fund in the past 100 years, or well, forever, effectively. And but he's responsible for making chicken McNuggets possible. McDonald's almost didn't introduce the chicken McNuggets, which would be sad. But why? Because they went to the farmers and said, we'll buy millions of this from you if you guarantee the price. The farmer said, oh, that's nice, a big long contract, I really want that. But we couldn't, on the other hand, the price of chicken feed, no, it's only chicken feed, but it still costs money when you're buying it, a lot of it, it goes up and down. So if our profit margins are 20%, if the price goes above that, we might make a loss. The risk is too great. So McDonald's says, great idea, but no, I don't think we can do that. Ray Dalio comes in and he says, we'll fund this. We'll hedge the cost of the chickens. We'll guarantee the price of the chicken feed so that they can offer a fixed price. Happy days. He could understand the economic machine by breaking down the markets into the component pieces and studying the relationships of these pieces through time. And this is perhaps the more important point I want you to make. When you're here, you'll be looking at the world through a particular lens, a particular model. And I'll talk about this model, the different models that you might use and when they're appropriate, when we talk about behavioral finance. So it's a battle really between two different kinds of models. So to give you a sense of what I mean, when you think of a chicken, you're thinking of this, a fluffy thing, a sentient thing, and you're thinking it shouldn't be in a cage, it should be free, because that's a great, good model to have. If you're a cold-blooded financier like Ray Dalio, what you think of a chicken is nothing more than the price of the chick, whether then it's hatched, which is cheap, corn and soy meal. You put the corn and the soy meal through the chicken, and after a while it grows and you get a big chicken. That's it. So the corn and the soy meal prices were the volatile costs the chicken producers need to worry about. If you guarantee that, so if you're looking at this chick through an economic lens, then you can see, okay, that's what we need to fix up, and you supply that service. Now, the point I want to make is that his model isn't wrong, and neither is the other model. You just need them for different purposes. You just have to bear in mind, okay? An excessive focus on looking at this, on the Ray Dalio sense, can lead you to think of a chicken and not worry about the fact that, they are actually living things and maybe they ought to be housed safely as well, rather than just crammed into a cage or whatever. Another way, project finance. So this is something you might go into if you're looking at project finance for large infrastructure. So look at Elizabeth Key, the Eiffel Tower. A lot of different parties have to make contributions, and they all have to have their interests aligned with each other to be able to coordinate their work and contribute to building a large project. So people who do this, middlemen who put this together, are valuable. How valuable? Brendan Quinn, he's a lawyer specializing in project finance, was offered $2.6 million pay package. Another point, so this is something else I want you to, that this is often, people talk about risk in terms of individual preferences. So in Australia, you get this, you'll often say, oh, we should be like Silicon Valley. Why aren't we like Silicon Valley? Why aren't we generating more startups like they are over there? Because we're just too scared of risk. That's rubbish. The people in Silicon Valley aren't any more risk averse or risk seeking than we are. Except that they have a financial system there that allows them to diversify that risk very effectively. We have one over here as well for small mining companies. In Western Australia, in Perth, we understand small mining companies. We have a system for allocating capital and diversifying that risk efficiently so that if you're in Mongolia, you're in Africa, you're in Asia, people come here to get the capital to invest in those other countries because here we know the risk. So if you look at out of 100 mining companies that set up, 90 of them will lose money. That's 5% might make the money, 3% might make a respectable return, 2% will make an enormous amount of. So you find a way of getting a portfolio of risks together so that you can invest in projects where 100 of them, where 2 out of 100 will earn you all the returns. It's a question of the system rather than looking at individual risk preferences. Now the last one, and this is where the real money is made, and I'll go a bit longer. I said I'd stop at 4:45. I'll just go for 5 more minutes, sorry. There'll be a natural break. This is where the real money is made. This might look the least of all the things, but this is where the money is. People like Ken Griffin make their money because when you earn and you're saving up, there are 2 ways you can make money. You can earn money as a salary, and then when you retire, you're hoping to live on your wealth. But while you're earning, you want to make that wealth work for you. But you're busily investing in doing your career. What time do you have to go around looking for other investment opportunities? It's a full-time job. So you give it to a middleman, an expert like Ken Griffin. And the question is, how do you identify them? That's a separate issue. And are they really good? We'll talk about those issues later. But this notion of giving it to an expert, a middleman, to invest for you is very crucial. It's where a lot of value gets created. To give you a sense of this, what would you choose? $1,000 or $500,000? Now, I don't know about you, I'd pick $1 million. And if I thought that's too much money, I'd give away half to my favorite charity. Okay? But there's no world in which I would rather pick, just on the face of it alone, 500,000 over 1 million. It's better. Twice as good. But what if you had an environment where you can't invest, where the rate of return is only 1%, whereas another environment, if you receive $500,000, you get 10% return. Now it's different. Now, if that $1 million times 1% gives you $10,000, not so attractive, but 500,000 multiplied by 10% gives you $10,000. So the extent to which you can put your money to work, earning wealth for you, is important. So a good financial system allows you, gives you opportunities to invest your money to make it work for you. If you don't, then you're stuck with this kind of situation. Let me show you here. So this is from 2013, and it's a story in the New York Times from China. And one of the things about China, even though it's not that many years ago, it's developing really fast, so things have changed since then, and I'll give you an instance of how this has changed shortly. But back in 2013, you had this situation where you have a couple who's working down a coal mine practically every workday of his life, and his wife also toiling from dawn to dusk in orchards during the apple season. She earns $12 a day tying little plastic bags. The rest of the year she works as a substitute store clerk. All of this is going towards their daughter's education. Effectively, their daughter is the investment. Now you can think of this, the enormous pressure. It's all very nice that the daughter's agreeing, but there's a lot of pressure on the daughter, and who knows? In the best of circumstances, she mightn't do well or whatever. There might be a whole host of reasons. It's a fairly risky, high-stakes endeavor. That's because there are no other investment opportunities. So again, this is going back some time. It's 2006. It's back again. Things have changed really fast. But the personal savings in 2005 were a record 1.7 trillion because China was a poorer country then relative to the US. In fact, it still is poorer relative to the US. But people in China were saving much more than people in the US. And partly because people in the US have a financial system that allows them to invest. So people want to invest, they don't have many channels. Enter Jack Ma, 2013 Person of the Year. And his fund became China's largest with 47 billion under management. It has 49 million customers. It was adding them at a rate of $400,000 a day. So you can see here now that people have an avenue to invest in. They just leap for it because it just frees them up. It's an instance of finance creating value. Yeah. Okay, that's it. We'll come back at, no, it's not the second half. Come back at 4 o'clock.
choose to record the lecture, so I could not do the own quiz, right?
Ah, right. Yeah, okay. Oh, we'll put it to your final exam.
Okay, thank you.
Following it? Are you following it? Okay, can you hear me? All right. So, what exactly is involved in finance? You go into what's the kind of work for which you get rewarded? What's the tasks that you do? And so finance work basically involves intermediation. What an intermediary is someone who comes in between two people and gets them a transaction. So there's a transaction, it's an exchange of goods or services between two people. And then you have an intermediary. Like when you're buying a house, you might go through an agent. An agent is an intermediary, a middleman. So finance work involves this middleman work, matching the savers with the spenders. So the savers are people who have surplus savings. Spenders are people who have projects in mind or they want to spend money on. And the kind of work involves pricing risk, designing, advising, selling products to protect against risks, monitoring and enforcing contractual obligations. So that's Maria Krakowski has broken this down even further. So again, this is not something you'll find in typical finance textbooks, but I think this is a really useful typology. So when you're involved in finance work, this applies to across a range of different sectors, but I think it's also applicable in finance over here. You'll be doing one of these kinds of roles. You'll be performing these roles. So the different functions that middlemen perform are these 6 over here. They're providing access across a barrier, which is a bridge, guaranteeing quality, a certifier, monitoring and enforcing contracts, bearing risk, providing information, or taking the heat. And I'm going to go through each of them. What I'd like you to do is to understand this. So what you might, in the next couple of weeks or something, maybe bear these in mind. You'll say, what are the 6 functions of an intermediary? So and I'll give you some examples to help you memorize that. But maybe sometime in the middle of a lazy Sunday or whatever, just ask yourself, what are the 6 functions? Test yourself that way. I've given you the first chapter of this Middleman Economy book, and that's all that you really need to pass this particular course. But I would recommend the whole book because it gives you a more detailed explanation of this. Because if you're a middleman, and all of us here in this room, unless you're actually going to build something or make something, will be performing some kind of middleman function. And it's important that you understand what exactly are you providing, what role you're providing. So we'll have a look at each example over here. So one example here is providing access across a barrier. So Ken Griffin is one person who's providing access across the barrier. He's a hedge fund manager. He's giving people access to investment opportunities that they can't get themselves in return for a fee. A different kind of access across the barrier is one provided by Kent Kwan, who was a student here some years back. He's founded a company called Atlas Trend that allows you to invest in a particular investment theme. So if you think leisure, you want to involve, you think that's where the money is in future, people will have, as they get older, they'll want to spend more money on leisure, or the leisure time will increase, so you think I'd like to invest in that sector, then he has compiled a portfolio of investments dedicated to leisure, and you buy a share of that and gives you access to that. You might think aged care is another section where you'd like to get some exposure to. It's too costly for you to do yourself, so you do it with Get. So that's a bridge. Another one is guaranteeing quality, certify. You lend money to someone, you need to know that they can pay you back. Now, and this is quite, depending on the kind of history that you have, you can use a model. So sometimes you can use it by a machine at a remote distance. So for example, teachers typically will get lower credit ratings because as a group, teachers are fairly safe, conservative people, so banks are willing to lend them money at a lower interest rate because they think, it's the kind of people who not all that wild and can be dependent, they have a steady job and can be relied on to repay their debts. But you have a situation, some innovative places, so for example, recently, and as I pointed out in China, the financial situation, the financial markets there are developing at quite a rapid speed, and for reasons which I might go into later. But people, if you don't have a credit history to rely on, you have to rely on different methods to assess risk. So here you have one lender, China Rapid Finance. They go through and they're often lending against people who are borrowing money to buy real estate, and they say, yeah, so how much money do you have? How much can you borrow? We borrow this much. And we also have some renters who are renting our apartment. So the cash flow from them plus our savings, we can repay the loan. Except that sometimes people will say that they have someone who's renting their apartment when they don't. So they go into to look at the number of toothbrushes, dirty towels, dirty dishes. That's a sign that someone is living there. But there you have a middleman guaranteeing the quality. That's a certifier. Now, as I said, things are developing much faster. So here you have this a category. There's a Zima credit score, which takes into account all of the credit of your contacts in Alipay's social network. So the kind of people that you mix with, if you mix with high net worth people, there's a chance that you're also a high net worth individual, so that increases your credit score. If you mix with a low rent crowd, maybe your credit will also be not so trustworthy. The other thing, and this is the monitoring and enforcing contracts. The enforcer. So this is, to illustrate this, an example from India, a Kabuliwala. A Kabuliwala is someone from Kabul, Kabul being the capital of Afghanistan. People from Afghanistan are generally, a lot of the men there are very big. The important thing is that they're bigger than the average Indian. The average Indian looks someone like me. It's not so physical, impressive, but a Kabuliwala, these are big, solid people. And so in Delhi, this is in Calcutta, they used to be used as enforcers of contract. If you're lending money and people aren't paying, then you send around this guy to pay up. Another business model is, if you do this really well, you don't even have to worry about monitoring credit. So if you're the mafia, you have an effective business model. People come to you to lend money, to borrow money. You don't worry about checking their credit. Why? They don't pay you, you go and break their leg. They have every incentive. So people basically will self-select. They'll only come and borrow from you if you're going to repay. And they'll be motivated to repay you. So you don't bother about doing credit checks if you can effectively monitor and enforce contracts. In India, this is a group of people, I thought this was interesting, where you have diamond traders from Gujarat. They have to trade and they have to send money routinely across hundreds of miles. And so, how do you send this diamond? It's highly valuable stuff. If you send it via the post, it's most likely to get stolen. But there's a small community of people and guardians who collectively can be trusted. And even if one of them can't be trusted, decides, oh, this is my big chance to make a break and get away and come to Australia, the family will repay them, and then they'll go after him to make sure that he gets punished. So it's a small community, and that's how they've made their money. Another one is the blockchain, the trust machine. So this is why there's talk about, when people talk about this revolution in finance that will come about, it's because the blockchain is a way of trusting people without even knowing them. The Engardia thing relies a lot on personal connections, on the families knowing each other and enforcing their contracts. With the blockchain, you don't have to trust. Or you don't have to know the people. It just enforces the trust. And we'll talk about that in the 12th week of the lectures. But if we have this trust without knowing each other, you can see that the universe of the set of potential transaction increases vastly. In fact, this is so important that Douglas North, a Nobel Prize winner, is saying the inability to develop effective low-cost enforcement is the most important source of both historical and contemporary underdevelopment in the third world. If you can't enforce contracts, if you can't monitor and enforce the contracts, then a range of contracts just become unfeasible. No one will do any business. The amount of business that can be done is much lower. So according to him, this is really, really important to develop a trustworthy system of economy. So matching savers with spenders is another thing, that the bearing risk, the risk bearer function, and this is what the banks do. They add value. They take deposits from people, a whole host, so you might deposit $200, $300, $400, and then they'll lend it in a large chunk, and you want it on demand, so you get it on demand. So whenever you go to the bank, you expect to get your $200 or whatever money. They'll lend it to people, to long-term borrowers, people, say, wanting to build a house, and they'll want to borrow it for 30 years. So the banks basically take a whole lot of small liquid investments and transform them into illiquid loans. They rely on people, on the small people, to have an estimate of how many people will want their money in any one period, so they make an estimate of that. So they know that even though you have a whole lot of small illiquid investments, not everyone will come at the same time. And if they get that right, then you have an effective business model. But they're bearing some kind of risk. The other thing is bearing risk. This is what happens in the share market. Essentially, buyers and sellers are all trying to identify the best price. And the reason we have the share market facilitates investment is because people lend money to or invest, and they take on that risk. You're bearing risk, and in return for bearing that risk, you get a return. The magical thing is you don't need to know anything about these companies, or you don't need to know the people there individually, but because you have this trust in the share market, in the mechanisms, you're willing to invest, even without knowing a single person in that company. Providing information, this is a big, big thing. This sense of information, the value of information is enormous. And there's no better indication of this than Michael Bloomberg, who's made a fortune out of collecting information and then repackaging it and making it accessible to people in a way that they find they can use easily. In fact, most of us are doing just this. In your job, you'll find that you're taking information and you're writing a report. Essentially, you take information, putting it in a form that is digestible to the people who are going to use it. So it's got this Bloomberg terminals. I said easy to use. They actually take a little bit of getting used to. But the good news is that here in the business school, we have the best trading room out of all the universities, and really better than many commercial institutions. The Commonwealth Bank comes here to do training for their clients here using our trading room. They like the setup, but they also, because of the quality of the data and the array of different information sources that we have. We have here access to data that most professional organizations wouldn't have. So the likes of your accounting firms or your banks, they would have maybe as good, but mostly they wouldn't be as good. It wouldn't be as broad. Why am I saying this? It's because you should take advantage of this and pick up some skills in learning how to use a Bloomberg terminal, how to use Icon, the different Thomson Reuters, and I'll be giving, when it comes to your assignment, we'll show you some uses of the particular database that you can make of this. Just as a matter of interest, this is my friend and colleague, Andrew Kaminsky. He designed much of this. But Andrew, for his PhD thesis, did a highly computationally intensive thesis, and he found out that the gold market, the gold and silver market, was being rigged. And as a result of him making that discovery, those markets were shut down. The mechanisms by which the prices were set at 11 o'clock each day in London, and they'd been going for over 100 years, were shut down. And he's the star witness in a case against the major banks that were involved in so quite a big deal. Aidan Arundel, he's a director, so this is, again, he's a concierge. He's an accountant, but he says the kind of things that he does, you could be a lawyer, you've got to be a specialist in one area, but then to be a middleman, you then need to know a whole lot of other areas. It pays you to be a specialist in one area, but then you do have to know other aspects of the... He once gave a talk to my students when I'd like him to come back and give a talk to you. He said the kinds of things that I wish someone had told me before I left university. Basically, he was explaining the middleman functions of a person doing finance, the different kinds of work that you have to do and why they're important. So I'll see if I can get him or one of his colleagues to come and give that particular talk. Because you need to know the institutional detail. So one reason why the investment banks hire an engineer with some expertise in finance is because to put together an engineering deal with finance, you need to know something about engineering to be able to assess the different elements of the contracts, and then you need to know the finance. So that's why it's helpful to have a specialization in a field other than finance to be able to put together the two things. And then the last one is the heat, taking the heat, which is the insulator. So the insulator is someone who effectively acts as a go-between, and I'll give you one example that Maria Krakowski puts an example. She says, if you're a sports star and you know that you're worth tens of millions of dollars, but you also rely on your public profile as a good guy, just an average run-of-the-mill Joe who happens to be really good at playing cricket or soccer or football or something. So that's important to your public image. You can't go around saying, I'm a superstar, you pay me $10 million. Because then the rest of the public thinks, you're just greedy. You might be so talented, but you want tens of millions of dollars just for kicking a ball around, for playing sport? What kind of guy? So you have an agent. Everyone knows that you're the agent, that you have an agent who negotiates on your behalf, but because you're not directly involved, it makes it easier for you. So that's the role of an insulator there. So, are the criticisms of middlemen justified? Now, this is, I think, an issue with the way economists view this. As I said, a lot of this finance is about first-year economics, applying the principles of first-year economics in a different context. But I think there are some blind spots in economics, and one is this notion of a sense that a productive sector can also go off the rails at some point in time. So people, if you talk to an economist, they'll have very good reasons, like the reasons I gave you, just why finance can add value. What they don't know, or what they have little conception of, is a vocabulary to talk about the ways in which a middleman can do something that's not so productive. So the Royal Commission, for instance, and we had an instance of this with the Royal Commission where people said, we know the banks do so many useful things, and if we're going to have a Royal Commission, it'll just stir up all this pointless kind of complaints from all these little people who really have no basis for their complaints, and then we might have more regulation that will ruin a good thing. If it's not broken, why try to fix it? All of those commentators have now pretty much changed their mind, thinking, oh my God, we didn't realize it was such a big deal. There's such problems there. We're so glad that we changed our mind. And you've got written statements from people saying, I thought everything was okay, it's not. And part of the reason is because they didn't have a concept of how the financiers, they were so taken up with the ways in which finance can add value, they couldn't see how it might actually not add value. It could be detrimental, or how the middleman role could be misused. So this is where I think we're going outside of economics to this article here, where it's provided a typology, a categorization of the different kinds of behaviors of middleman, so that allows us then to have a sensible discussion about when a middleman adds value and when they ought to be brought back into line. So if you think about this full categorization, here you have a middleman who's competent. This is along this line. And over there you have a middleman, the warmth of a middleman. If you think about warmth, think about this as benevolence. This is where the middleman is trying to act in the best interest of the client. As someone going into the industry, what you want to be is in this quadrant over here. That's where you want to be. You want to be warmth, you want to have the best interests of your client, and you want to be competent. So that way you're providing a service whereby you win, your client wins, and everyone's better off. Okay, that's the productive element. What you don't want to be is where you're competent and you exploit your competence at the expense of your client, your customers. Then you're a predator. Or you want to be you don't want to be a parasite where you're incompetent and basically you steal from your client. You're not adding anything, but you're just basically incompetent. And you're stealing. The third one is where you're benevolent. You really want to do the right thing by a client, but you're incompetent. You basically can't deliver. You would want to do the right thing, but you can't deliver. You don't want to be a pet. You want to be a teacher's pet, but not this kind of a pet in this financial sector, right? Where you're incompetent. And so, to give an example of this kind of things, we have Commonwealth Bank, CBA, NAB, Westpac, and ANZ, where they're lending money for housing mortgage. That's a good thing. You're lending it to people who want to borrow money. You're acting in their best interest. They can't save up. And everyone wins. The bank wins. They get interest. You win. You have your house, your good standard of living. You don't have to wait until you save it up. Where you're a predator is where you're using your competence, where you're using your position to sell to agents, sell financial products that's not in the client's best interests. And this is what's being done in a systematic way. They're providing incentive to their advisors to pick what would maximize profit at the expense of their clients. They were also parasitical. So they had charged fees for clients for personal advice that had not been provided. In some cases, they charged dead clients, that is, they charged the estate, fees for which they had never provided any service. They claimed that their systems were broken. But even when they were told that the systems were broken, they didn't move fast enough to fix this particular system. So you're incompetent and you don't have your client's best interests at heart. And the other thing is, when they were incompetent, they had processing or administrative errors. But the remarkable thing that these processing or administrative errors benefited them rather than their clients. So again, that's known as stealing, in other words. A pet is something like a credit union. So the credit unions are different. They have a mission to be community-oriented and serve people, not profit. So a small group of people, they band together to savings. But then, because they're so small, they don't have the economies of scale. So oftentimes their transaction cost, taking money out of the bank, is higher than at a regular bank, and they can't charge, or they charge interest at a higher rate. Not always, but some. So if you can't get those economies of scale, then you're trying to be good, but you're basically not capable. You're a pet. You're incompetent. One of the tutorial questions you have, though, is it's difficult to identify the categories. It's not, I've given you a typology, but it can be difficult. So I'll give you a situation, and you'll see it described in more detail, and then I'll ask you, and you'll have a discussion. Was the bank being a parasite, a predator, a pet, or a partner? So I wish this is something that I think we could talk about more, but we don't have enough time. But I want you to make you aware of the moral dimension and the complexity. So I want to give you a vocabulary, but ultimately then you have to make that decision there. So this is what Finance Works involves. The next thing is, why is finance profitable, and will it remain so? You know, as I said, providing water is essential. But people who provide water, they don't make so much money. So why is finance profitable, and will it remain so? And Paul Krugman points out that finance hasn't always so glamorous. 30 plus years ago, he was writing in 2009, so about 40 years ago when he went into finance, or he was a student at Harvard, not many people went into investment banking. It changed after that. And so why? So to explain why, let's have a look at these three things. Now, this is a more important slide than you might appreciate, because it tells you something that you have to get on top of. If you're in any business, in any company, and generally the higher up you go, this will become more important, you have to get three things right. You have to get the economics of the business right. In other words, you have to sell a product for more than it costs you to make. That's the economics of it. But then you also have to navigate the politics. And the politics are the social values, law, power structures, lobbying. All of these are often reflected in regulation. And I'll give you a current example from this. If you don't get this right, this can destroy your business model because your regulation will work against you. If you get it right, it can help you. And finally, you have to get the technology right. Make sure that you're moving ahead with the technology. So all of these things have contributed, all of these three factors have kind of worked to improve the profitability of finance. So the profitability of financial services, like everything else, is affected by demand and supply. However, in the financial markets, we have this system where prices and costs aren't so obvious to people. So even where people overcharge, they're able to reap the profits because people don't seem to invest as much time in their financial situations. If you ask people how much superannuation they are earning, they won't know. A few months back, I cut my health insurance bill by half. It turns out that for over 10 years, I've been paying more than I needed to. And suddenly I heard all these people coming to me selling this health insurance. I thought, let me just check what am I actually getting. And it turns out I was getting a whole range of coverage. I was paying for a whole lot of coverage that there's no way that I would need them. And so I was able to cut it in half just by doing that. I'm a finance professor. Lots of other people just do the same kind of thing. You get charges with the way you use your bank account. It's just enough. They just clip you enough for you to not to be aware of it and not to be bothered by it. So that's one reason why finance can earn a lot of money, even though there's a lot of suppliers, because there's not a lot of effective competition. The customers don't seem sufficiently alert to it. Let me give you an example. This is one. Active fund managers cost investors billions, so they don't seem to monitor their performance very well. They don't move their funds out. The cost of remittances in Australia. Now, Australia is a well-developed financial market. So you'd think sending money overseas should be relatively cheap. It turns out that for every $100, it costs you $7.88 to send money overseas. That's enormously high. I mean, you credit one thing, you send it, it should be easy, but it costs that much. In the United States, it's $5.63. I don't know why it's so low in Russia. But there you go. The economics can also be a bit peculiar. So this is one example where it's helpful to understand. You need to know the particular situation. So one of the things about a middleman is to understand the economics of the situation. So let's have a look at this. Here you have this company, Pressprint Solutions, has sales around $3 million, has been profitable for a few years. Yes, it couldn't borrow $48,000. So you might think, what's wrong? They want $48,000, they're profitable for a few years. It's only a short-term borrow, and nobody, not even a bank, would look at us. So they're saying there's something wrong with the system. But is there really? Maybe not. Let me put this into context. Let's say you borrow money from a bank to build a house. So you decide, property crashes, prices are falling, now's a good time to get in the market. You invest $1 million. And you buy the house, you go into a loan with the bank, And the bank says, great, yeah, no, fantastic. Economics graduate, commerce graduate from UWA, you're a perfect customer. We want you. Great. The next day, you get even better news. You've won Lotto. $1 million. You think, whoa, great. I can go back to the bank. They'll be so happy to see me. I can repay them their money. What do you think the bank's reaction will be? No. You want to pay us your money? No. We don't want the money back. We want you to keep it. We want it in 30 years. And in the meantime, we want your interest. We didn't go through all this trouble of giving you the money, evaluating your risk, for you to give us back the next day. Well, how do we make our money? We make our money by charging you interest. So now you have, if you buy a car, when you buy a car from a used car sales yard, they're not making the money on the commission, on the cost between a new and an old car. They might make some money. They really want you to borrow. The first thing they'll do is they'll say, come and have a talk to our financiers. We can give you some really good credit terms. That's where the real money is made, not by the markup from selling a second-hand car. So if you go in and buy a car, don't tell them you've got the money in the bank. That's what happened to me recently. I got a car after 20 years. I thought it's time to get a new car, second-hand car. And then they said, oh, we got some really good deals for you. So they gave me a car, and they showed me the markup that was, they said, we're only making $700. It was a pretty good deal. I said, oh, great. And I said, okay, have you got enough money? I said, what about the finances? And he says, come and talk to this finance guy. He'll explain it to you. So I go and talk to him. He says, oh, great car you're buying. Yeah, it's a really expensive, it was a German model car. And then he says, I can also sell you insurance. It's very expensive to get these parts. You can get insurance for $5,000. You can get insurance for 3 years. Or, let me have a look and see, but I can get it to you for 5 years. Let me see how much more it is for 5 years. For 3 years, you can pay $5,000. And then he looked it up and says, for 5 years, you can get it for $5,200. It's only $200 more. I think, oh, that's like a bargain, right? Now, see what he's done? He's oriented me to 5 years, thinks that's a normal fee. And I think for 2 more years, you only pay $200 extra. So I'm thinking this is a bargain. No, I'm not. It's not a bargain at all. It's those kind of things are. I'll show you a Homer cartoon related to this thing at all. It's one of the worst deals that you can get. You're better off just taking your chances with the car rather than with the insurance. The point I'm trying to make here is that it's all about the financing is about the interest, the cost they make their money from the interest. So if you pay the short-term borrow, the bank's gone to all this trouble of evaluating. It might cost you $300. They don't want you to repay the money in 2 weeks. They don't make the money that way. They make the money by lending it to you. So there's no sign of inefficiency. This is a sign of a market working as you would expect it to work. So the politics, this is the social laws reflecting regulation. And so this is the example. So here, Afterpay dodges new rules on credit checks. So Afterpay and its buy now, pay later rivals have dodged a requirement to conduct costly credit checks before they can sign up customers, but they may have to do more to ensure their users can afford to repay their debtors. So you can see here, they've done some extensive lobbying to make sure that they fall on the right side of the regulators. So this is the profitability of the finance work. Again, I think I've made the point, so I'll move up. Now, our bankers overpaid. And here, this is, again, I would recommend you to read this. What he says, Thomas Philippon says, is that there's a tight link between deregulation and human capital. When you have a deregulated environment, it provides a basis for innovation in finance, things like Afterpay. And so it expands finance and there's high returns because new innovation means new ways of dealing things, scarce resources, so you need people to be able to understand and explain the new products. But when you have extensive regulation that inhibits lending, then the returns go down because banking then becomes routine, becomes boring, so the returns become correspondingly lower. What's peculiar, what he can't explain, is that over a long period of time, unlike other industries, finance hasn't become efficient. It used to cost 2 cents per intermediation. 100 years ago, it still costs about 2 cents per dollar of intermediation. There hasn't been this increase in efficiency. Okay, the last substantive point, this is about Goldman, and Goldman embraces automation. Even the masters of the universe are threatened. Here, Goldman Sachs' new headquarters employed 600 traders. Now they have there are just 2 equity traders left, and the rest of the work has been taken over by 200 computer engineers. Maybe this is the future of finance. It actually probably isn't the end of finance. And for that, I think I'm going to recommend that you read this book, Why There's Still So Many Jobs. This, David Autor tells you why technology actually ends up creating more jobs rather than killing them. Now, what I like about this explanation is that he explains why. He gives a really neat model to explain why increases in technology will actually more likely create jobs rather than reduce them. Let me give you one example from our field. So you see there are fewer tellers required in each bank branch because of automatic teller machines. So you think, oh, that's a set-up example of technology reducing the demand for automatic tellers. But now that you require fewer tellers, the cost of opening a bank branch has decreased. You can now open up many more bank branches. And so now in the world, there are actually more tellers than there was before. Because even though there are fewer in each branch, there are more branches, so the number of tellers has actually increased. The kind of work that they do is also a bit different. So rather than simply dealing out money, they're primarily giving advice. So technology doesn't ruin jobs, but actually can create them. It's just a different kind of work. People talk about the internet as being the end of journalism. Again, traditional journalists are decreasing, but certainly other forms of journalism have increased. Okay, the last point, does who you know matter in finance? What do you think? The answer is yes, networks. Who you know does matter. Developing the trust between people. So one of the good things here, one reason why you're in the right place is not so much because of what you learn, because of the people that you meet. Unlikely as it might seem, a lot of you will be in positions of responsibility. And the networks that you form over here, in places like the student clubs, FAWA, etc., will stand you in particular good instead. But also in finance, what really matters, particularly the upper, is what you know, how well you end up making money. And you can always think, all of you over here are in a position to end up in the upper echelons of finance. Think about these people. Do they look like the typical banker? Yeah, that wasn't the question. The question is, do they look like a typical banker? I ask you to identify them. The answer is no. And you might think, well, they look like an outsider. They look a bit like me, for that matter. So you might think, well, if I'm an outsider here, what chance do I have? Actually, it doesn't really matter in finance. In finance, if you have the skills you can make, you'll get rewarded. All of these people came, in some sense, from the outside. You have, so personal connections do matter, but this is Anshu Jain, who's the former joint CEO of Deutsche Bank. So this is the top bank in Germany. He couldn't even speak German. And he became the joint CEO. He'd have been the sole CEO, perhaps, if he could speak German, so he did. And then you have Tidjane Thiam, who's the CEO of Credit Suisse. He's named the Euromoney Banker of the Year for 2018. So he's the head of, he's from West Africa, and he's the CEO of Credit Suisse, one of the biggest banks, investment banks in the world. And the head of Australia's most successful bank, you wouldn't have heard much about this. Notice in the case studies in the Royal Commission, nothing much about Macquarie Bank, pretty much unscathed. And the recently appointed CEO is Shimara Wickramanayake. Historically, this has been true as well. So you have Mayer Amschel Rothschild, the founding father of international finance, at a time when Jewish people were at the edges of society. He founded the Rothschild family, and that was become still around today one of the most successful banking families. Another remarkable story is Jeremiah Hamilton, the richest black man in the United States. This is 10 years before the Civil War began over slavery, and he managed to be one of the most successful Wall Street businessmen over there. So, my point is, you too can make it in finance. If they can, you can make it as well. Couple of housekeeping things. There's no required text. Best time to see me is after lecture. Now, one last thing is, I love this course. I love teaching it. I've been teaching it a long time. I enjoy coming in, etc. I'm a friendly guy, but I'm not your friend. So, in this class, when you email me, I want to see Dear Ray or Dear Professor. And I want it in good grammatical English. I don't want hey, what. You write that, you don't get a reply. So, write, and you'll get a reply from me. Let's go to the MCQ. This is one test that is a group test. So feel free to talk to the people beside you. In fact, I'd encourage you to talk to the people. That's one of the reasons I want you to know the people beside you. Google the answer. Do what you like. Call your mum. It doesn't matter. Yeah. Oh, you got to look it up. Something I forgot to mention, next Monday is a public holiday, and so there'll only be one lecture next week, which is on the Tuesday from 8 to 9 a.m. in the Fox Lecture Theatre. There won't be a quiz. And there'll only be the one lecture from 8 to 10 a.m. It's just easier. I could record the lecture, but I find it easier to actually have an audience so I can gauge this thing, so that's why. So I hope to see at least a couple of you there.